My sister, she's a bit older, 28, has been spoiled rotten since when we were kids. Throughout my life, I resented my sister. It's awful, but it's the truth. You know when people say that parents don't have a favorite child? Well, that's a lie. My parents had one, and it was my sister. Everything in our home was meant for her. As the princess's birthright. Anniversaries. Only about her. Presents. She would get them every year or holiday, while I would not. And they always supported every decision she made, including not going to college, dating whomever she wanted and having kids. Why are things like this? Because my family was not rich, all they could scrounge would go to her. As a man, my father would often tell me to just swallow it and toughen up. It's my duty to allow her to be happy. This was the story of my life until I left home for college in another city, as college is free here. Housing during college is also free. I mean, I could become independent of my parents and work part-time or assist teachers to make up any income I could to survive, food, etc. Today, I'm a project manager, and I'm still doing all these things to get by, as I prefer to be dependent on my parents. My sister got married many years ago and currently live in the same city in which I work. She has 6 kids, all under the age of 10. And they're quite spoiled children just like her. She's a single mother because her ex-husband left. Despite being in the same city, I rarely see my sister or parents because they've always ignored my existence. I've been pretty self-sufficient and successful. So, they justify saying they have nothing to worry about when it comes to me. The problem is that she's constantly asking me to help her take care of them. Babysitting, or taking them to the parks, etc. However, I don't have that much time, but this has never stopped her. She once got my class schedule online to make charts of when I should take care of the kids. I haven't seen it personally, but the last time I saw it, her apartment was pretty gross. From the hearing of what I'm hearing now, her floors are covered in dog crap, dirty laundry, dirty dishes, and trash. My sister is an ex-drug addict. She's admitted to using almost every kind of drug and is an heroin addict. She said she's not using it currently, but I suspect otherwise. I don't know if she's fallen off the wagon and that's why her house is suddenly so much worse, but hey, I wouldn't be surprised. She got sober for the kids in probation and she apparently has gotten rid of the dog. I have no idea where it is. Last I knew, she had a completely different dog. Regardless, at the start of June, the week of the 6th, I had an on-call responsibilities. And the 2 weeks before that were full of unhealthy amounts of coffee and sleepless nights. During that period, I was barely looking after myself. There was no way I could take care of 6 children. Even if I could, I would not do this. The issue is that my family, some of whom I have not spoken to in months, is coming out of the woodwork to tell me I need to take responsibility for her kids. But both parents are lazy. And my sister has not been able to keep a job for more than about 2 to 3 months, and about 15 years. They all know my wife and I are childless, and on top of that, we're not financially or mentally able to care for a child, and definitely not 6. Regardless of our relationship, also, it would be unfair to ask my wife to make this kind of sacrifice. We both agreed to have no children when we got married. To change something like that generally means a divorce. Everyone else in the family, or the ex-husband's family, is either unwilling to take them or is not in a position to take them. She said that if I did not take them, they'd go into the system and it would break my sister's heart if she knew her kids were going to strangers instead of family. Never wanted kids. I don't know anything about kids. I don't know the first thing about raising them. Now, I don't hate kids, have a phobia of them, or anything like that. But I do have severe anxiety around them. It's hard to tend to kids under the age of 10, and it often makes me panic when I'm hounded by them. I've watched all 6 of her kids in the past at once, despite my issues. But because of everything they needed and the pressure, I ended up having a panic attack that ended with me passing out. Beeb has pretty severe autism. I mean, essentially nonverbal, not toilet-trained meltdowns, etc. It's the last bit that worries me most. As Beeb is not a small girl, she's 5'2" and 100 pounds, which is the size of some adults, and she's only 9, so she's still growing. I don't feel equipped to take care of this child at all, let alone with siblings. When I talked to Jessica, she started to get agitated with me and asked me why not. Apparently, my parents had a family meeting with my sister, excluding me, and decided that I should help her out. I reminded her about what happened the last time I watched her children, and about my anxiety towards them. She began to get upset and told me, and I quote, "That happened a year ago. I don't even think you're scared of them. You just don't want to do it." I told her that I'm not scared of them. I feel overwhelmed and anxious due to their needs and behavior. I should also mention that her kids are not the most well-behaved, which makes them even harder to control. This is where she started getting really upset. Raised her voice at me even and told me, and I quote, "Does it look like I have money for a babysitter? That's why I'm coming to you." I told her I was sorry, but the answer was no. I also told her if money was an issue, I could help her pay for the babysitter, and she just scoffed and told me to just forget it. She said that I'm obligated to take care of the kids because I'm her brother, and if I were in her position, she'd do the same thing. Which I seriously doubt. She cried and called me awful, but it's my life and ultimately I get to be selfish with it. Having a child is not an 18-year commitment. It is a lifelong commitment and one I've decided not to take. She cheated with multiple different men and lost her ex-husband, and I don't think it's my job to swoop in and save her from the consequence of her own actions. I mean, I don't feel like I owe her anything. She left my home without even saying a word, despite my still trying to talk to her. Later that night, she wrote a lengthy Facebook about how, quote, family should always be there for one another, blah, 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 and how, quote, we should help each other despite our issues. My mom agrees with my sister and says I should have helped her. I didn't say no because I didn't want to help her. I said no because I knew I could not handle it. Other people disagree. Friends of hers whom I've never met have been reaching out to me and calling me at all hours to leave nasty voicemails. I'm saying I need to step up as a brother, but I just feel like she's trying to use me as her ticket out. I personally cannot stand her two boys because of how they treat me and everyone else so cruelly while pretending to be nice around my parents and my sister, both of whom are terror for the reasons below. Andrew, 10-year-old and male, is a social bully. He's harsher to weird kids by making more honest comments about them and likes to point out differences. But he most likely is going to just belittle people regardless of this and seems to enjoy making people angry and cry. He also gets into trouble with a lot of his comments, and some of which border on criminality. But he's so good at hiding and explaining his behavior that he ends up getting away scot-free or having very minor punishment. He's undoubtedly the favorite of her two sons. He was the result of my sister accidentally getting pregnant at around 18. When he found out that she was pregnant, he basically rejected his own son, left, and ghosted her immediately afterward. Fred, 9 years old, is more of a physical terror. You see, he's so emotionally unstable, which my family somehow excuses as temper tantrums, and just a physical threat in general. He's usually so angry and mostly screams at people whenever he gets mad at something. He even goes as far as to hurt other people and even animals too, mostly indirectly, either by throwing stuff in their general directions and sometimes at them, or by doing things like punching and kicking things around whenever he gets in a quote, mood. My sister was severely traumatized by the whole thing with 10-year-old, and it was made even worse when she found out that she was pregnant with her 9-year-old during her senior prom. We never ended up finding out who the father was. Probably as a result of being pampered as a kid and later hurt in life, she was not good with her ex-husband either. He was the biological father of only 2 children, but raised the other kid. He did everything for her. Cooked, cleaned, took care of the kids' school parenting and hygiene, and took care of the kids in their home daycare. He had enough of her BS, though, and left her years after marrying her out of pity. He found another woman in the Philippines before leaving her. Things crumbled when his responsibility was shifted to her. There was an incident one day where her 7-year-old Barbara got mad at me because I would not let her jump on the couch. I explained to her that she could get hurt and she threw an absolute tantrum at me. However, it was normal, I guess. It is what young kids do. Well, around the same time, my sister gets home and she starts suddenly bawling her eyes out and running towards her mother. I'm confused that she was just fine a second ago, but I followed behind her to greet her. She immediately starts on some sort of rant about how I had a man in the house, and how neither she nor her sister had eaten all day. Jessica was so mad and started asking questions. I shook my head and said she was lying and that she had cameras, so we should probably sit down and watch them, and she said no, that I needed to go before she called the police. So, I left. A few hours later, she calls me and apologizes, saying she watched the footage and saw no man enter the house at all, and that she had seen that her daughter had refused to eat the dinner that I made them. She asked when I could come by next as she hoped I understood the misunderstanding, but I said I would no longer be babysitting for her. She said that Barbara was just 7 and that kids lie all the time. But I still refused. We went back and forth over the phone, insulting each other, and that was that. Our mother said that I'm being ridiculous for being mad at a kid, but it's more than that. I could have gotten in trouble if the police had shown up and she had said what she said. My family now thinks that I'm being too cruel because the boys are just children who need to, well, get people to love and guide them. My sister, in particular, is upset about this because she sees this as a potential abandonment from her inner boys. And she's trying to reason that, like us, the boys are also going through a mentally rough time. And abandoning them is going to cause them more mental harm. I called my mom and said I could not take them, and someone else in the family would have to step up or they'd have to go into the system. I've been accused of not caring if they end up being abused in foster care, and if they never get to see their family again, which I'm pretty sure is not how foster care works. My friends, to an extent, agree with my family, but also state that they understand why I would want some time off. So, they have been very neutral about the whole thing. A couple days after that, my parents came to my apartment and dropped off the kids. They all ganged up on me, and my father used this as a quote, "you owe me" phrase, so many times growing up to manipulate me into doing whatever he wanted. My mother told me I was incredibly selfish to not care at all about my niece and nephew, and only cared about myself and ignored my family. Well, I refused again, telling her I had never babysat before, and I was looking forward to a quiet evening. First, she told me she was just leaving them there, and I told her I would call a child welfare committee and report her for abandonment if she pulled something like that. She begged and pleaded, and actually began to fake cry. As I did not want to provide my neighbors with entertainment, I reluctantly agreed. I earn a decent salary in operations with a great company, and I had already requested a move to Australia, where the rest of my team works. From what I've heard and seen, they're pretty flexible about letting people move between offices within the US and abroad. One person transferred after only a year of working because they did not like the city of one of the offices was in. My transfer was approved, and they were in the midst of helping me apply for a visa and all that good stuff. In the time Jessica's kids were here, we had clear boundaries and rules which the oldest son tried to break and argue over, but ultimately followed for the most part. He had 2 outbursts in the first 2 weeks he was here, to the point where restraints were absolutely necessary. At first, things were fine. The kids were a bit rambunctious, but still somewhat tolerable, and they ate their dinner without starting a food fight, and then I left them in the living room to watch a movie. I was in the study getting some work done, and I had brought my cat and dog in there with me because I wanted to keep them safe from the children. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash. I rushed to the living room and found the precious antique clock that I kept on the mantelpiece on the ground in pieces. I mean, it was worth well over $1,000. I was furious, of course, and asked how the hell this happened. The oldest kid incoherently explained that they had taken it down to look at it. Then the younger 2 were fighting over it and dropped it. Ear-shattering wailing from the other 2, blaming one another for the demise of my prized possession. I had enough. Once things were ready for me, I dropped the kids off at their grandparents' and flew for good. After settling in, I decided to call my parents to see if we could have a conversation together. Almost as soon as my mother picked up the line, she was fuming. Apparently, my sister has been talking to them about how quote awful of a brother and uncle I was that I did not lift a finger to help out with their kids, going so far as to call me an ungrateful a-hole. Dad yelled at me to leave, and it was they who planted the idea in Jessica's head that their kids could be taken care of by someone else. Now, they're tasting their own medicine. The kids are now at their grandparents'. I threw it back at them and said, "You had both me and my sister. You've got more parenting experience. You should take the kids if it means that much to you. I didn't have her. She's not my responsibility." This morning I received angry text messages and phone calls from several relatives asking how I could be so heartless and how I could value a clock more than my nieces and nephews. I've told them I don't care what they think, because the way I see it, I was completely within my rights in kicking them out. They should just be grateful that I've decided not to make my sister pay for it. Judging from the fact that they have 6 kids, she probably can't afford it. This really left a sour taste in my mouth. I'm not close with my family and relatives, but I don't want them to hate me or something. I mean, I don't know. I don't want that to happen. And I definitely don't want my niece and nephew to end up in a crappy home. But I also don't want to be that person who reluctantly changes their entire life to raise kids, and ends up being a totally useless and resentful parent. Moving here was a decision that I'm proud of. My wife has never been this happy before, but I don't really know if I behave too poorly, or if I'm in the right. Many years of strange familial interactions will make you feel that way, and I'm so frustrated and upset that they expect me to clean up my sister's mess, and threaten to disown me if I don't help. I don't think the kids should be with my family either, but they're in a far better place to take care of the kids than my wife and I ever will be. I'm not going to swoop in and clean up some other mess for her. No, not this time, and not for something that would ruin both mine and her kids' lives. I refuse. Date number 1. She has also been trying to clean up her house and has been driving 2 hours to bring my nieces to school, so that my sister does not need to. I don't agree with this, though. I'm glad that they're going to school. I told her friend that she needs to not bail her out, because if she can't do these things without her, then we're not really helping her. I've been right where she is. She was basically me 6 months ago. My sister's been asking me for money for almost all her expenses now that I got a double promotion at my job. Essentially, I urged my sister to continue just to look into other things as well. Contact her social worker and utilize the resources that some of you have. I told her just about everything I could. My cousin is a licensed foster parent in our state, so, in my opinions, well, there is no better place for the child. Plus, I get all the cute Snapchats from my cousin and her daughter with the baby. She's already a mother and has a large support system as well as experience with children that we don't have. The kids will be safe and cared for with our cousin, and I firmly believe that's the best place for them. My parents take issue with the cousin having the baby, and the reason is that my grandmother also lives with said cousin. And while no one can be bothered to visit, they just know that my cousin is taking advantage of our grandma. Spoiler alert, I live there. If anyone's being taken advantage of, it's my cousin. Lastly, I know some people are claiming I must be lying or leaving something out. To my knowledge, I'm not. And I'm comfortable with everything I've said as my side of the situation. I do have anxiety and believe that taking care of all 6 kids by herself is too much for her. I'm not pretending it isn't, and I'm also not pretending that she had no right to be mad at me. Update number 2. Hey guys, well, I just want to tell you, many months have passed. And surprise, surprise, my parents have done it again. That's right. I entered the door in the morning time, and the freaking kids were on my doorstep. and my mom was simply driving off. She just left them with me after making it clear multiple times. I called a friend who owns a small daycare and she told me I could drop them off here. Thank goodness. I gave her my sister's contact information and told her to keep me updated, and I texted my sister about what happened. And I simply gave her the address and phone number and I picked the kids up from daycare since my sister was not answering her phone and fed them. She picked them up at about 9 p.m. and was absolutely livid that I left them with a stranger, that it was irresponsible, that something could have happened, blah blah blah. I told her that she knew I could not take them in, and that she could have picked them up if she was not comfortable with that, since, I texted the address to her. I thought this was a reasonable thing to do when someone leaves kids on your doorstep without a warning and you can't take care of them. My mom told me my sister already has so much on her plate and that I should just help out whenever I can. But I'm in no way leaving my life, which I have here in Australia. I ended up telling my parents something that I think got through to them, which was in the sense of I love her. I care for her, but the point was made to my parents when I empathize that I'm worrying about me. I've lived with people who don't pull their weight, and as much as I sympathize with her inability to, I'm not in a position where I can take the responsibility on again. I also want to thank you for the support. It means a lot to me to know that I'm not wrong for saying no, and that I do have some like-minded people to chat with when crap like this comes up. Updates. Number 3. Every couple of months I go and visit, and her house is absolutely disgusting. I'm talking dirty diapers on the floor, laundry piled up everywhere, trash overflowing, moldy food sitting around. Yeah, well, the house is not one that a child could be surviving in. Along with that, there are no child barriers anywhere, and I constantly see her kids going through areas of the house that should be off limits. Along with all this, her child is noticeably underweight for their age group and is always wearing filthy clothing. The youngest child worries me more. He's 4. He doesn't speak, he's still in diapers, and they're making no effort to potty train him at all. Every time I go over there, his diaper is full of needs to be changed. Apparently, her car has no airbags, and she does not buckle her children into car seats. I tried to plead with her to prioritize fixing the car and buckling up the children. But my sister said the kids won't let her because they get uncomfortable. What? When I mentioned this to a close friend, they said their mother also did not buckle them in when they were little, and they got ejected from the car in an accident, and still have chronic pain to this day. Her kids are failing multiple classes in school, and adding that to being home alone, I'm starting to be afraid for the well-being of these kids. Her 5-year-old son walked into another person's house just to get food. I learned all this from our cousin, who still talks to her, and the father isn't really in the picture, and he can't take them in since she drove him away with all the tantrums. And now he's well settled with his current wife. My friends are telling me to mind my own business, but how am I supposed to mind my own business when the exact same thing that's happened to my friend could happen to my nieces or even worse? Also, if my sister gets pulled over, she'd probably get arrested anyways. So, I'd only be speeding up the inevitable. The problem is, mainly, with her oldest daughter. Jessica's constantly putting her down and making her feel like crap, ignoring her when she's talking, making her watch her 2 younger brothers and leaving the kids alone in the house. I mean, she did this before in her old home, where she had roommates, but she just moved out into a pretty bad neighborhood. I mean, my dad lived there for years and I live 2 streets away. This is extremely concerning, considering this area is very known for crime. Not only that, but she uses the oven, toasters, and such when alone. I've spoken to her about my concerns, yet she chooses to ignore them because, quote, children are messy. And, quite frankly, no child wants to live in that environment. Update number 4. My Beeb's safe place. She knows all she has to do is call me. My mom got her a phone for when her mom would not wake up, feed her, or do all the basics for caring for a child. And I'll be there in no more than 5 minutes to get her, and she does call often. The last time she called me, she was hysterical, crying. Nobody would care for her. Mom would not get out of bed, her friend would not get off his game, and I finally had enough. So I picked her up, gathered as many clothes as I could find, 3 pair of jeans, 2 dirty shirts, and no shoes. And we left. I then found out she missed school because her mom would not get out of bed. Day 11 of the school year and she's already missing for no good reason. Once we got home and we settled in a bit, I called the ex-husband and told him the kids were being neglected and something needed to be done. I then get a call from my sister's boyfriend saying that he was calling the cops at my home because I'm holding my niece hostage. I told him to come get her. Many excuses and yelling matches later, I just hung up the phone. I know for a fact that at least half of my family will disown me if I do this, but I plan on calling Child Protective Services on her anyways. If she can't even throw a dang diaper in the trash, she really doesn't have the responsibility and fortitude to take care of a child. And that child would be better off out of her hands. It would probably be better if the report came from her husband if that's the route taken. Before inviting the government into my sister's and kids' life though, from my side, I bought her baby gates. Spent a day helping get her place cleaned up and asked her if she was seeing a doctor. Offered to hire a sitter so that, well, she could get chores done or run errands. Taken her to get some new outfits for her and her children. And one thing I can't understand is why my parents can't help her. They're not that old, you know. Update. So, me and my sister's ex-husband contacted CPS. We've had enough, and let them know everything I've heard. Well, the goal of CPS is not to take children. That's apparently a last resort when there's no other viable option left, and I was informed that the goal is to help the child remain with the custodial parent. So, CPS would help the mother find the resources needed while monitoring the situation. It's not true that CPS will seize children willy-nilly and shove them into a foster care system. They simply don't even have the resources. But, abandoning your child on the doorstep of a family member and not even waiting to see if their home is clearly endangering a child. They come, do an interview, and based on the nature of the report, inspect the house. They come back a couple more times, randomly, to make sure she was following their guidelines, of course. She also tried to trace it all the way back to me. But CPS understands that it's not me who should take care of Jessica's kids. So now my sister's forced to take care of her kids properly. CPS people mandated parenting classes, making an orderly home and life, counseling, anger management, and giving Jessica resources like numbers with associations to give single parents affordable child care, a one-time housing cleaner to give the house a very deep clean, and a general life skills class. It's completely confidential who reports, but I feel fairly confident that they will know it's me. I provided some very specific details outlining their abuse that only I would know. My parents are more mad at me now for making sure that my sister has to fully take care of the children. They think that I'm, quote, pressuring the family instead of helping them. I feel like I made the right decision, but I can't bite back the feeling that my, quote, family situation is about to crumble beyond repair. I can't help if this makes them mad. My family will see it as betrayal, but Jessica kids will see it as betrayal if I don't call. They will never be able to forgive the people in their family who saw them suffer as children and let it continue because they wanted to keep the favor of a crazy person. I also wonder if my parents would have been happy if the kids were relocated to strangers. They should be thankful that I did not call the cops instead of CPS. At this point in my life, I've decided to take a step back from the toxicity that is my family. They've set me back in so many ways without a second thought for me well-being, thus reinforcing my child-free stance. I will never have children, ever. Also, never again will I take on someone else's mistakes. I have my own life to live, and I cannot continue to let them guilt me into things. It's time my family dealt with their BS on their own. Anyways, I'm leaving for home this weekend. Thank you to everyone for your comments and suggestions. I am grateful.